And that kind of leads us to our next question. Can you describe the most fun that you've ever had in an educational setting, and the most fun like as a learner, and the most fun as a teacher or instructor in an educational setting?
The one about,
I'm going to go first because the most fun I've ever had in an educational setting was watching Lisa do one of her activities and teach her class. It was so funny, and the whole class was a riot. And it was this activity called sticky hands, where people use sticky hands to get these wacky questions. She was laughing, the class was laughing, and it was a remarkable thing. I mean, I didn't believe my own theory until I saw that. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. So yes, that is by far the most fun I've ever had in a classroom.
that was one of the ones I was going to say for fun I've had teaching. David came to observe me and give me feedback on my teaching, and I did that slappy hand one. And it was like, I was laughing so hard, I was snorting and like my head was down on the desk. It was so funny. And it was a kind of a wacky icebreaker type game. It was the first night of class. And so in place of like, tell me your name and your major and that type of thing, they came up to the front of the room and I gave everyone those stretchy, sticky, slappy hands. And I laid out questions on note cards and they had to slap it and read the question. It's like everything from the way they slapped it to how the card flung back to the question was funny itself. And then the way they answered it, it was awesome. So that was one of when I had fun.
The class had fun too. I had fun. It was remarkable. It really was.
One of the students goes, "This is a lot more fun than I thought it would be." That was my favorite quote. So thinking of being a student, I have more being a teacher, but I think being a student is the hard part to figure out, to recall something I had actual fun doing, learning. And like only one comes to mind. I mean, when I think of that, I think of like my cohort members and the relationships we had and the humor that we would bring, but that wasn't faculty induced. It was just kind of us trying to get through the program and situation. But I think I took a sex therapy class, and we were learning about the male anatomy. And so our instructor had us get in groups, small groups, and construct the male anatomy with our bodies. And it was totally absurd, really funny. Like, it was kind of embarrassing. And I may not have already known the male anatomy at that point, but if I hadn't, it would definitely be something I would remember. So I think it's like, one of my students in my study said, if you can bring emotions into learning, you're going to remember it more. And so I think that's kind of the whole point of this question is like, what do you recall? What do you remember that was fun? It's going to be something that you remember what you were learning during that time.
Fits well into David's is not definition too, right?
Right.
So that reminds me, I have to tell you this one, and this is something I concocted to try to keep up with Lisa, and it was in one of these kind of fun seminars, but I was trying to get people, as Lisa said, to kind of remember the feelings of play, to kind of get people to understand that at the end of the day, what they really were after are these emotions, not some particular activity. So I had everybody write these little cards. It's like, when I was a kid, I used to do blank, and it made me feel blank. So people would say, like, when I was a kid, I used to climb trees, and it made me feel adventurous. Then I had all these balloons and markers in this giant room of all these people. And I said, okay, blow up the balloon and tie it up, and then take a Sharpie and write the feeling that you on those balloons. And then I said, okay, on the count of 3, throw the balloons in the air and just bat them around. And I was so worried that people would think this was going to be stupid. But on 3, this room of like 300 people erupted in noise and cheers and balloons and feelings. And then I had everybody grab the balloons. And then, so now it's like, you don't have your own feelings. So people were reading up other people's feelings. And I was just like, it was so much fun. I mean, there was a systematic way to collect data. I could have done it in a Google Doc. I could have done a poll anywhere. Right. But I'll tell you what, watching those balloons fly through the air. So I've done it since then. It never fails. Just people, for once, are just kind of like their feelings are out and they're flying. And I think it's such a beautiful visual emblem of what we're talking about. But it also turned out to be just really awesome and fun. So,
David, I was in the room when you've done that.
oh, you were there. You were there when I
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
Okay,
it
so
was super fun. And the visual like effect too of the balloons was so like the use of balloons even was like brought back all these feelings of joy and like what's it like to try and throw a balloon and catch one and
so awesome.
It's
all
childlike.
it's
important
very
to know
Mhm.
childlike.
Absolutely.
because I came up with this idea and I said, I'm thinking about doing this, but I'm not sure this is a good idea. And Lisa basically shamed me into doing it. She's like, what are
No,
you?
your first idea was just to have note cards. And I'm like, that's real fun.
So I'm just, even when you like feel like you know how this stuff works and you want to do it, it's hard sometimes to commit to it. It's scary. I don't
Totally.
think there's some point where you're like, I'm a fun expert and I just have all these great ideas. It's more like you have to basically be like, we're going skinny dipping. I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I'm
Right.
jumping in. So,
I'm so glad you said that, because that there's so much vulnerability in fun. You don't think that because fun is something you want, but it's so vulnerable.
Mhm.
And I think especially as a faculty member standing up there in front of your class they're expecting you to be the expert. They're expecting you to be serious. They're expecting lecture where they take notes and don't usually interact, because that's like the traditional approach. So bringing something in like the balloon idea or the slappy hands on the very first night and they don't know me yet is very vulnerable. Like the first time when I first started doing this, my hands would be literally shaking as I started one of these weird, goofy activities. And now I'm more comfortable with it. I still get nervous, but I just think that's a good point to remember, because some people, I think if they're not using fun and play in the classroom and then they start to, and it's so nerve-wracking that they're like, oh no, I'll just go back to what I know and what's comfortable. I think we want our students, we want them to be pushed outside of their comfort zone and be vulnerable. We have to be willing to do that too. And so I think
Mhm.
try it, do something small first, build your way up, and just see that it really works.
Do you guys have time for a bonus question? Because this is really making me think
Yes.
of something else. I just want to hear you guys talk a little bit. I'm hearing like Lisa, you talk about like how it's scary work and how there's vulnerability in there. And you know, I also hear you guys talk about ways in which you've influenced each other's teaching. And will you just talk a little bit about what that's been like to have somebody that is really committed to this work that you can, you know, kind of be partnering with around this work?
Yes. Honestly, I came into this from hearing David speak, and so that kind of sparked my interest. And then we've been meeting regularly about this stuff. He's like my go-to person about fun and play and teaching. And I think the biggest thing David's done for me is like he said earlier, he just gave me permission to play. And it wasn't like a verbal like I give you permission, but just like his support and us brainstorming, and then he'll ask me, oh, how did it go? It just feels really supportive. And so I often say that bringing fun and play into teaching is can be isolating and vulnerable. And so that's why we created this Professors at Play listserv, just to have that support and community and just permission to play. Because I think that's one thing David's really helped me with, is just like encouraging me to do it when it feels scary.
I should say, in all fairness, you know, I've been doing this work for a long time. It's been very academic and intellectual. I mean, my joke is always when I talk, you've heard this, Andrea. My wife says, how can you be the professor of play? You're the least fun guy I know. And I say, I don't like to have fun. I just like to think about it. So that's why I was a great partner with Lisa, because I was like, of course I'm encouraging her. I'm like, go try this stuff. See if it works.
Because you don't have to do it.
But yeah, you can't really overemphasize, you know, especially as you're doing something new, how important it is to have colleagues that support you. And I think our dream with Professors at Play is to, first of all, expose the range. And trust me, we thought we were the, you know, the handful of you know, people that were doing this. We were so wrong. And now that's exciting. And I think, you know, there's that getting people to start to see there's lots of people doing it. I think the next step in higher ed is to get some research published, so people have to really see more and more that, like, hey, this isn't a silver bullet, but it is an ingredient that we really need to have in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, like, you can make food without salt, but gee, wouldn't it be nice if you had salt in your kitchen? And we really think play is kind of the spice of all this. So yeah, and the only other thing I wanted to make sure I did say is, I truly have this very intellectual perspective on fun, which is great when you're talking to people, when you're trying to be professorial, when you're talking to workplace people. But I've joked with people over and over again, you should make sure you have a friend that's a counselor, because they will get to the heart of the matter. And I think that's where Lisa and I kind of found our common ground. Is she always reminds me that there's these frameworks and these strategies and all this, but it really comes down to the heart. It comes down to how people feel. And that's why it's scary. I mean, you're touching people's feelings, you're touching their hearts, not just their brain. And when you do it right, it all lights up, and their minds are going fast, their hearts going fast. And that's what we think of the funnest times you've had in your life. It's all of that, right? And so we're just trying to bring that into higher ed. And I think that, she's been an absolutely wonderful teammate to do this with. But, membership is open. We want to play with lots and lots of people.
Great. Thank you guys so much. It's so awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else, Dennis, we need?
No, this was great. Thank you for the conversation. It's fun to talk with other folks that like to play.
Can I just share one more thing with you?
Yeah.
Of course.
I came across this yesterday, and I shared it with David, and I just wrote it out because I was on a walk with my dog, actually, and I'm like trying to think of a metaphor for the point of fun in teaching. And then I remembered this story. My step uncle died a few years back of brain cancer, and his nephew wrote this really awesome story about how Tom, my step uncle, taught him how to navigate the waters by working with the power of the currents instead of against it. So I remembered that story, and I looked back into it, and I found this quote. I'll just read you this little section. My step uncle said, "The water is always stronger than you are. Organize your tools and effort and work with the current. Your goal isn't to steer the boat so as much as putting it in a beneficial position for the currents of the river to steer it." So I think about that in terms of fun in the classroom, and in that metaphor, the water is the students' stress, trauma, barriers to learning. And I think that traditional education, which is, I think, strict, hierarchical, lecture-based, is like fighting those currents to try to steer students' learning. But the way I see it is that fun and play is actually organizing your tools and efforts to work with the current. And so it reduces the students' stress and anxiety, makes them feel safe, allows them to concentrate. And so it's like putting the boat in a beneficial position for the currents of the river to steer towards success. So I just think of that, and that's kind of how I see it, is it's like working with what the students are bringing in to increase their likelihood and their accessibility to the content. So I think it's foundational in what we should be doing.
Love that.
And if you publish this anywhere, feel free to share the professorsatplay.org website.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe we could do like a little, like, if you want to should we put the website or email Lisa to get on the listserv? What's the best way to
can they go to the Google? Should we give them the website because they can access that through Google?
The website has more context, and then they can get to the listserv easily from there, and it has more information, instructions, and our contact information is there too. So
awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely include that.
I think I'm going to go and add